So I want to talk to you guys about a very interesting report about what to expect for the year 2040. And this comes from a report called Global Trends 2040, which comes from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. So this is something that is being reported through U.S. intelligence. This is what the intelligence apparatus of America believes in regards to what we can expect for the year 2040. So this is what's going to happen 2 decades from now, or this is what likely could happen 2 decades from now. So let's get right into this. Basically, I read through a good amount of it. Basically, it confirms a lot of what I've been saying. Not to brag, but it's true. It talks about the rise of nationalism, how nationalism is going to intensify, militarism is going to intensify, globalization as we know it is going to be greatly broken down and taken apart. There's going to be lots and lots of populism, regionalism, different poles of power are going to form. America is not going to be the only pole of power over the world. There's going to be other poles of power, other blocks of power, including the European Union. So I'm going to read to you guys some excerpts from the report, and I'll give you my commentary. So the first one that I got here is economic stagnation fostered widespread, and the way that it does the report, it doesn't say, this is going to happen. It actually writes everything in past tense, which I find interesting. It's almost like they're preparing the history books already. But it says economic stagnation fostered widespread insecurity across Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia, fueling a retreat to subnational ethnic and religious identities, regionalism, nationalism, tribalism. We're talking religious fundamentalism. In regards to South Asia, we would be looking at Islamic fundamentalism and also Hindu fundamentalism. In regards to Africa and the Middle East, this would be more than likely Islamic, this would obviously be Islamic fundamentalism. Who am I kidding? So we're going to be seeing more and more of an intensification of regionalism, nationalism, things of that sort. Islamic fundamentalism is going to be huge. It already is a big thing, but it's going to get bigger, especially with the rise of Turkey acting as the most powerful, most technologically advanced country of the Islamic world. Especially, when a country like that is rising up, people, in this case, Muslims, are going to feel a lot more empowered. The next one is, quote, new waves of migrants headed to the developed world, hoping to escape poverty, poor governance, and increasingly harsh environmental conditions. Their hopes were dashed when political pushback prompted destination countries to block most migration. So, yes, we're going to be seeing more and more migration. We're going to be having more and more migrant crises. And with that, you're going to see more nationalism because they are going to be populists. They are going to be political operatives and activists who are not going to, they're not going to want to see migrants in the country, and they're going to exasperate sentiments against migration. The next one is, with the trade and financial connections that defined the prior era of globalization disrupted, economic and security blocs formed around the United States, China, the EU, Russia, and India. So we're going to be seeing the EU becoming more and more separate from the American pole of power. And we're already seeing that. That's already happening. The EU is already talking about creating its own internet cloud to rival against big tech corporations like Amazon. The EU wants to rival with Amazon. The EU wants to rival with American technological power. The EU wants to form its own military power. And this is going to be a rival to American military force. To maintain domestic stability in this world, states adopt mixed political models combining elements of democracy and authoritarianism. So authoritarianism is going to become more and more common, increasing surveillance and potentially repression. Many states turn to exclusionary forms of nationalism to unify majority populations against perceived foreign enemies. And when you have nationalism, you're going to see militarism. And when you have militarism, the prospect of war increases tremendously. Unable to attract talent globally or sustain international collaboration, technological innovation atrophies. Wealthy countries begin to compensate by shifting resources to domestic education. So countries are going to want to become more and more technologically independent. And we're already seeing this with the EU wanting to create its own cloud. Rival blocs compete for control over scarce resources, leading to smaller wars or other means of diverting attention from domestic problems and rallying public support against foreign enemies. Nuclear weapons proliferate. We are already seeing this, especially with Europe. Why do I focus so much on Europe? Because Europe is supposed to be a model of civility. It has always had, for thousands of years, it has always had this image of itself as a civil place. We can go all the way back to the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire boasted itself as a force of civility, as a force of liberty and democracy, and a place where citizens can have where citizens can observe their rights. Europe has always had this image. Europe has always had this image which it has projected to the rest of the world, going back to the Roman Empire and going into European colonialism with the British Empire, with the Dutch Empire, the Spanish Empire. Europe has always had this reputation of being a force of civility. So when I see the Middle East going to hell, well, the Middle East is predominantly a Muslim region, a Muslim subcontinent, and seeing that sort of religious violence doesn't really surprise us. When I look at India and I see Hindu nationalism rising, well, India being a Hindu country, that doesn't surprise us either. And the fact that India has had a history going all the way back into millennia of Hindu violence and barbarity, that doesn't really surprise us either. We can go to China. We can say, well, look, China is putting people in concentration camps. Well, that's bad, but it's not surprising. Why? Because China has had a history of genocide. China has had a history of butchering millions of its own people. China has had a long history of civil war. China had a civil war going all the way back before the Japanese invaded in the 1930s. And that civil war between the nationalists and the communists resumed itself after the Second World War, and the communists took over. We can look to Myanmar and say, well, look, there's a terrible political violence and civil unrest taking place in Myanmar. Well, you could say that's bad, but it's not surprising, given the fact that Myanmar had a civil war within recent history. But you look at Europe, and Europe has always had this image of being a force of democracy. It's always touted itself as a form of as a place of democracy. And Europe is also a major. The EU bloc is a civilization. I mean, it's a very civil place. There's not a lot of murder that takes place in Europe. Europe is such a great place that people from all over the world go there because they don't want to live where they're living at already. People in Africa, they want to go to the EU. People in the Middle East, they want to go to the EU. People in Asia, they want to go to the EU. Why do they want to go to the EU so badly? It's because it's a hell of a lot better than Africa or much of Asia. So when the EU becomes militaristic, that's when you really know the world's about to go to hell. Because the place that for thousands of years has had this image of civility is about to lose its civility. And if that place loses its civility, then much of the world ain't going to have civility. It's a really bad indication. It's a really good indication, I should say. It's a very effective indication. It's an accurate indication as to the state of the world. So when I hear about Germans saying we want to put nukes on our fighter jets, and yes, they have been talking about this, that's pretty worrisome. The report goes on to say, unable to attract talent. Okay, I already read this. I already read this. Public frustrations and protests grew in many countries, but fragmented and competing opposition movements were unable to agree on clear demands and goals. Polarized societies, shaped by social media, led to more political deadlock, and wild policy swings. These factionalized communities, primarily in democratic countries, were unable to take effective action on the economy, the environment, migration, and foreign policy. Uncertainty surrounding crisis and erratic government responses suppressed investment and job creation, plunging North America and Europe into a period of sluggish growth that many likened to Japan's lost decade in the 1990s. So Europe and America are going to go into an economic slump. They are going to enter into economic diminishment. We're going to be seeing more and more political factionalism in the Western world. We're already seeing this. And this was accelerated by the whole George Floyd fiasco. Oh, this one guy died. We don't even know if the cop killed them, but we're going to conclude that the cop killed them. Therefore, we hate the police. We want anarchy. That's what this is talking about. And this is only going to get worse. The United States attempted to preserve ties to remaining allies in the region, but Japan and South Korea... Now, this is one thing that I found really interesting. So the United States attempted to preserve ties to remaining allies in the region, but Japan and South Korea pursued increasingly independent military modernization programs and even their own nuclear weapons program. So the Japanese are going to pursue nuclear proliferation, because the Americans are going to be more and more isolated. And the more isolated America is, the more old empires are going to want to rise, like Japan and Turkey and Germany and Russia and China and these countries. Because America is the big boss. America is the unipolar power over the world. Once that unipolar power begins to dissipate, other poles of power begin to rise up. And the U.S. Congress said this back in 2008. They said, listen, if the Japanese ever get the impression, if the Japanese and the Germans ever get the impression that the Americans don't really care about their national security, they're going to pursue nuclear proliferation. So, yeah, we're going back to the 1930s. This is a directionless world in which international rules of behavior are no longer followed. Why? Global cooperation is limited and technology fails to provide solutions. Why? Well, for one thing, technology has never really provided any solutions to world peace. It's actually made war a hell of a lot easier. And it's also made surveillance and authoritarianism a hell of a lot easier. So that's a non-issue. But globalization is going to die. Why? Because we have the Bannons of the world and the populists of the world running around saying, death to globalization. This is not going to help. Killing globalization is not going to help. It's only going to make things worse because it's going to get America out of its sphere of power. And once America gets off its sphere of power, all hell is going to break loose. Turkey's going to rise. Germany's going to rise. Japan is going to rise. China's increasingly aggressive moves in Asia elevates the risk of armed conflict with other regional powers, especially over critical resources. What power in Asia could fight the Chinese? I mean, we know the Russians. I doubt the Russians would fight the Chinese. The Chinese and the Russians have been allies for a long time. But what power could really fight China in Asia, in Northeast Asia? Japan. Japan is the only country that could efficiently fight the Chinese. Why? Because it has that NATO technology and that NATO training. And if you think that China is this big, mean monster, just look at the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Armenia, using Russian training, Russian weapons, got its ass kicked against Azerbaijan. Why? Because Azerbaijan got them NATO weapons, got those drones. Much more effective than anything given to a country by Russia. China's increasingly, okay, I already read this. Regional powers and non-state actors, including corporations, have more influence over domains like cyberspace and other technologies, but they lack the power to dominate the system. So big tech corporations are going to try to encroach on our rights. Are they going to fully succeed? No. But they're going to try to become the dominating form of power. They're going to try to eclipse the government. That's very dangerous. And industry could also accelerate the next Third Reich. And I know that sounds really crazy, but it definitely could happen, because who were the ones who got Hitler into the position of Chancellor of Germany? It was a bunch of industrialists. So that's what I mean by that. So there was another report that I read from Global Trends, and it's called Global Trends 2030, talking about what to expect by 2030. And this is some of the stuff that I found really interesting. There will not be any hegemonic power. Power will shift to networks and coalitions in a multipolar world. So America is no longer going to be number one. In the coming decades, not only will the big emerging powers like China, India, and Brazil make relative economic gains, but Colombia, Mexico, Indonesia, South Korea, Turkey, and potentially Nigeria also will make their marks. So Turkey is going to rise as a major superpower, global superpower. Regionally weak governments mired in domestic violence and civil strife are unlikely to play a strong role. This is speaking about the Middle East, leaving non-Arab powers, especially Turkey, Iran, and Israel, as the major players. So eventually the Middle East is going to come to the point where Saudi Arabia is going to become irrelevant. That's why the Iranians are going to destroy it. And the major powers of the Middle East are going to be reduced to really the three truly powerful countries of the Middle East: Israel, Iran, and Turkey. And that's what it's going to be. So yeah, that's really what we can expect more than likely. And I think I'm not saying that this is exactly what's going to happen, but I think this gives us an idea as to what's going to happen. It's giving us a rough draft of the future, a rough draft prediction, if you will. And I think it makes sense. You know, it makes sense when you have one power that goes down, other powers will start vying for that position. Think of Alexander the Great. As soon as Alexander the Great dies, you have the rise of the Ptolemaics and you have the rise of the Seleucids. One guy dies, the guy who was ruling it all dies, and his right-hand men vie for that power and that domination. Same thing with what we have today. America begins to decline in its influence. Countries that were in the past major powers are going to try to become global superpowers again. And that is going to lead to war, everyone. Make no mistake about it. America's post-war position has been the greatest force of preventing another world war. This is a fact. America, at the same time, has been doing some pretty messed up stuff to ruin its position. And I don't know if it's doing that on purpose or not. Maybe it is. Maybe they had this idea of creating another world war so that we can restart the dollar, like what the U.S. did in the end of the Second World War, when America said, "Listen, the U.S. dollar is going to be number one." So, America has been supporting Islamic fundamentalism. America has been backing Brexit with the Trump administration. America has had people within it who have been supporting things like Catalonian nationalism. The rise of Turkey has been supported by the United States. And the rise of Germany has been supported by the United States. It's why the Germans are being backed against the Russians. The idea of an EU military force has been given the indifference of the United States. That's why Donald Trump said, let's just pull out all the troops, or pull out a third of the troops from Germany. I agree with Joe Biden that that's a bad idea. Because once the American troops leave Germany, the Germans then have the excuse to revive their empire. And that is going to be very dangerous and would lead to a lot of human suffering. So, America losing its position in the world will lead to another world war. It's just that simple. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.